before hanging up, I heard my fiancé laugh. He's clueless about what I'm really doing. This is the story of Kamran Siddiqui and his fiancée Nadia Rao. They had been engaged for 14 months, long enough for the initial tenderness to settle into something that felt, to most people watching, like certainty. Kamran was a quietly ambitious civil engineer from Lahore, the kind of man who measured everything twice before committing, who believed that love, like construction, required a solid foundation before anything was built upward. Nadia was charming in the way that people who have learned to perform charm are charming. Warm when warmth served her, distant when distance was more useful. Their engagement had been arranged with family approval, but had grown, or so Kamran believed, into something genuine. What neither of them had said aloud, what perhaps neither had fully admitted to themselves, was that they wanted very different things from this marriage, and that the gap between those wants had been quietly widening for months, invisible the way a crack in a load-bearing wall is invisible until the ceiling moves. The morning Kamran overheard the call, he had been standing in the kitchen of his apartment making tea. It was an ordinary Saturday in late October, the kind of day where the light comes in sideways and makes everything look slightly more significant than it is. He had woken early as he usually did, and Nadia had stayed in the guest room. She often did when she visited on weekends, for propriety's sake, a habit they had maintained throughout the engagement with the unspoken understanding that certain boundaries mattered to both families. Cameron didn't mind. He had always been comfortable with patience. He heard her voice before he heard the words. She was laughing, that specific laugh, the one she used with her close friends, unguarded and slightly careless, the laugh she never quite used with him. He assumed she was on the phone with Sana, her childhood friend who lived in Karachi, and he almost went back to watching the tea darken in the cup. But then he heard his name. Cameron? No, he has no idea. He stood still, not dramatically, not frozen in cinematic horror. He simply stopped moving, the way you stop when you're not sure what you've just heard. He thinks I'm serious about this. I mean, I am serious, in a way. The family is good, the money is stable, his mother loves me. What more do you want? A pause. Then the laugh again. He's so clueless about what I'm actually doing. He thinks I'm in Islamabad visiting my cousin next week. I told him it's a girls' trip. Kamran set the cup down. He did it carefully, without making a sound. He stood there for another 30 seconds, maybe 40, listening to the muffled continuation of her conversation through the half-open door. Something about a hotel booking, something about him not being the suspicious type, thank God. And then he walked to the window and looked out at the street below, where an old man was walking a dog that kept stopping to investigate something in the grass. He watched the dog. He watched the man wait with patient resignation. He was not shaking. He noticed this about himself with a strange detachment, the way you notice a minor irregularity in data and file it away for later analysis. By the time Nadia emerged from the guest room 20 minutes later, freshly dressed and carrying her phone with the relaxed ease of someone who has said everything she needed to say, Kamran was sitting at the kitchen table with 2 cups of tea and the newspaper open in front of him. "You're up early," she said. "I always am," he said. She sat across from him and picked up her tea and said something about the weather getting colder, and he said yes. It was getting colder, and she mentioned that she was thinking of getting a new winter coat for the wedding season, and he said that sounded reasonable. They talked for an hour. He laughed at 2 things she said. She touched his hand once, briefly, on her way to refill her cup. When she left that afternoon, pressing her cheek to his in the doorway the way she always did, he stood at the closed door for a long moment. Then he opened his phone and opened the notes application and typed 1 line. Wedding date, March 14th. Venue deposit paid. Guest list, 280. He stared at it for a moment, then he typed 1 more line beneath it. She's going to Islamabad next week. She is not visiting her cousin. He put the phone back in his pocket and went to do the dishes. The following week, Kamran worked. This was not unusual. He had always used work as a form of interior management, not escape, exactly, but a way of keeping his thoughts organized while he processed things that didn't have clean solutions yet. he was the kind of man who needed to understand a problem fully before deciding what to do about it. Impulsiveness had always struck him as a form of laziness. He did not confront Nadia. He did not hire anyone or check her phone or ask her friends indirect questions. He did something quieter than any of that. He began to pay attention in a way he hadn't before. He noticed things he had perhaps always have noticed but filed away as insignificant. The way she answered his calls differently depending on where she was. Warmer when she was at her parents' house, clipped and slightly impatient when she was out with friends. The way she spoke about the wedding in terms of logistics and aesthetic preferences, but never in terms of them. Never, "I can't wait to actually be married to you. Only I've decided the centerpieces should be white orchids, not roses." The way she mentioned the Islamabad trip 3 more times over the following days, each mention slightly more detailed than the last in the way that over-explained things tend to be. He called his oldest friend Bilal, who lived in Dubai and who had known Kamran since university. "You sound strange," Bilal said. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. What happened?" Kamran was quiet for a moment. "I'm trying to figure something out." "About what?" "About whether I understand a situation correctly or whether I'm misreading it." Bilal waited. "What would you do," Kamran said carefully, "if you discovered that someone you trusted was performing a version of themselves for you, that what you thought was real was partly constructed?" Bilal was quiet for a long time. "Then I'd want to know how much was constructed." "Yes," Kamran said. "That's what I'm trying to determine." He didn't tell Bilal about the call. He wasn't ready to say it out loud yet because saying it out loud would make it concrete, and concrete things required immediate decisions, and he wasn't there yet. He asked Nadia once, in a completely casual way, whether her cousin in Islamabad was the same one who had attended their engagement party. She said yes, of course. Why? He said he'd thought of sending something with her, a gift for the family. It was nothing. She said that was sweet of him. He said it was nothing. She left on a Tuesday. He waited until Wednesday evening, when he knew she'd be settled and comfortable wherever she was, and then he called her. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Hey," she said. She sounded relaxed. "Hey, how's Islamabad?" "Good, cold, her kids are exhausting." A small laugh, convincing, practiced. "Tell her I said salam." "I will." A pause. "Are you okay? You sound a little tired. Long day at the site. Get some sleep." "Not I miss you. Not only 3 more days. Just get some sleep." "I will," he said. "Good night." "Good night." He hung up. He sat in the silence of his apartment and felt something settle in his chest. Not the sharp pain he had perhaps expected, but something duller and heavier. The particular weight of confirmation. He opened his laptop and looked at the wedding venue's website, the March 14th booking, the 280-person guest list. His mother had cried when they selected the hall. His father had shaken his hand and said, "Good choice," son in a voice thick with genuine pride. He looked at the venue's cancellation policy. He looked at it for a long time. Then he closed the laptop and sat in the dark for a while, thinking about the question Bilal had asked him back. How much was constructed? The answer, he was beginning to understand, was not a small amount. He did not call Nadia again that night. He did not send an angry message. He did not do anything at all except sit there in the particular quiet of a man who has decided to wait, not because he is afraid, but because he is thinking very carefully about what he is going to do next, and why, and how, and when. The wedding was 4 weeks away when Kamran told Nadia he knew. He did not tell her dramatically. He did not tell her over the phone, or in public, or in a moment designed for confrontation. He told her on a Thursday evening in his apartment, over a dinner they had made together. Lamb karahi, her recipe, while she was talking about the menu arrangements. "I've been thinking," he said. "About the seating," she said without looking up from her plate. "About Islamabad." She looked up then. Something shifted in her face. Not guilt exactly, Not yet. More like calibration, the expression of someone quickly assessing what they're dealing with. What about it? She said. You weren't there. Silence. She set her fork down. She looked at him with the kind of steadiness that comes not from innocence, but from preparation. Because somewhere in the last few weeks, he understood, she had anticipated this moment, or a version of it, and had prepared accordingly. Cameron, I don't need the details, he said. His voice was calm, not the forced calm of someone suppressing rage, but the genuine calm of someone who has had 3 weeks to arrive at this moment and has already done most of his feeling about it in private. I just need you to not explain it away. That's the one thing I'm asking. She was quiet for a moment. Then, how long have you known? Since before you left. Something crossed her face. It might have been a kind of relief. The relief of not having to maintain the performance anymore. Or it might have been something more complicated than that. It wasn't. She started. Nadia. He said her name quietly. I asked you not to explain it away. She closed her mouth. They sat there in the silence of the kitchen, the lamb karahi going cold between them. Somewhere outside a car passed. The refrigerator made its small, indifferent sound. What do you want to do? She said finally. Her voice had gone careful, precise. This was the voice she used, he now recognized, when she was managing a situation. I haven't decided yet. The wedding is in 4 weeks. I'm aware. 280 people. I know how many people there are, he said. There was something in his voice then. Not anger, but a firmness that she had perhaps not encountered in him before. A stillness that was different from his usual quiet. I helped make the list. She looked at him for a long moment. He looked back. I'm sorry, she said. It was said honestly, or at least with the honest acknowledgement that it was insufficient. There was no performance in it. I know, he said. He picked up his fork and continued eating. After a moment, she did too. They finished the meal without speaking. She offered to stay. He said no, it was fine. He needed to be alone. She nodded and picked up her bag and paused at the door with the look of someone who wants to say something that they don't know how to say. He waited. She left without saying it. He washed the dishes alone, the water running hot over his hands, thinking about the guest list and his mother's face when they'd booked the hall and the call he was going to have to make to his father. He did not cancel the wedding immediately. This surprised people later, the few who knew, Bilal most of all. But Kamran had reasons, and they were not weakness, and they were not false hope. They were something more calculated than that. His mother sensed something within a week. She called him on a Sunday evening and asked him, with the careful indirectness of a woman who knows her son and knows when not to push directly, whether everything was all right. He said yes, he was just tired. She said she'd make him shorba when he came for lunch. He said thank you. He met Nadia twice more in those 4 weeks. Both times were brief, practical, the kind of interactions required to keep the surface of things intact while underneath, very different work was happening. She was careful with him now, softer or performing softness, and he found he could no longer easily distinguish between the two. This bothered him more than the original betrayal in some ways, the uncertainty about what had ever been genuine. He had told her, that Thursday in the kitchen, that he hadn't decided what to do yet. This was true, but he was deciding. Meanwhile, Nadia was doing her own managing. She called her sister and said that Kamran had been distant lately, that she was worried he was getting cold feet, that she was doing her best to be patient and supportive. She wasn't lying, exactly. She had simply rearranged the facts into a shape that made her the reasonable party. Her sister said that men often got nervous before weddings. Nadia said yes, probably that was it. She texted Kamran 3 times in the first week after the kitchen conversation. Sweet texts. A photograph of a sunset she'd seen from her office window. A recipe she said reminded her of something his mother had cooked. He responded to all of them, briefly, warmly enough that she couldn't be sure where she stood. This was the part he had thought through most carefully. He had always been the person in his relationships, in all his relationships, not just this one, who made things easy, who didn't raise his voice. who absorbed discomfort rather than distributing it, who kept the peace at considerable internal cost. He understood this about himself without resentment. It was simply how he'd been made, or how he'd made himself. He was still that person. He just wasn't using it to her advantage anymore. What he had decided, carefully, without drama, with the same methodical patience he brought to his engineering work, was this. He would let her believe things were still resolvable. He would not cancel the wedding privately, quietly, in the manner she might expect, in a way that let her story about him be the dominant story. He would not give her the private dissolution she was probably planning for, the one where she got to reframe herself as the woman who tried. There were 280 guests. Most of them were his family's people. His parents, colleagues, and relatives, and lifelong friends, people who had come from Multan and Karachi and abroad, people who had spent money on flights and hotels and gifts, people who deserved, he felt, to understand what kind of foundation had been laid before them. He wasn't doing it for revenge. He had examined his own intentions carefully enough to be sure of that. He was doing it because the alternative, a quiet cancellation, a vague explanation, Nadia, left free to construct whatever narrative suited her, felt like a form of dishonesty he was no longer willing to perform. He called Bilal 2 days before the wedding. "It's happening," he said. "The wedding? The wedding is happening," Kamran said. "And then something else is happening." Bilal was quiet. Then, "Are you sure?" Cameron thought about the kitchen, the cooling karahi, her voice on the phone from a city she wasn't in, the guest list with both their names at the top. "Yes," he said. The wedding hall was decorated in white orchids, as Nadia had wanted. It looked beautiful. He had to give her that. Her eye for these things was genuine. One of the qualities he had at one point found genuinely charming. The lighting was warm and soft. The tables were arranged with the kind of careful precision that suggested effort, and from where Kamran stood in the anteroom in his sherwani, he could hear the murmur of 280 people settling into their seats. Nadia had looked at him once, briefly, before they separated to take their places. The way the ceremony required, her eyes had searched his face for something, and he had given her a small, quiet smile, not reassuring, not cruel, just present. She had looked away first. He stood at the front, waiting, watching the doors at the back of the hall, and felt something he had not expected to feel. Not nervousness, not anger, not the adrenaline of confrontation, a stillness. The same stillness that had settled in his chest the night of the phone call, the night he had stood by the window watching the old man wait for his dog. When the music shifted and the doors opened, he watched her walk toward him on her father's arm. She was beautifully dressed. Her expression was composed, almost radiant, the expression of a woman who has convinced herself that things are resolved because she needs them to be resolved. He watched her face as she walked, and he felt, for the first time in weeks, something that approached sadness, not for himself, but for the waste of it, for how easily this could have been different, and how completely she had made it impossible. She reached him. Her father shook his hand warmly. He shook it back. The officiant began. At the point in the ceremony when guests are asked if there is any reason the marriage should not proceed, Kamran turned to face the hall and said, quietly and without theater, that he had something to say. He did not shout. He did not use her full name like an accusation. He spoke for approximately 3 minutes, in the measured voice of someone who has rehearsed, not the words but the composure, and said that he had discovered, some weeks before this day, that the person standing beside him had been deliberately deceiving him and their families in ways that he believed the people present deserved to know before bearing witness to this marriage. He named no names beyond her own. He offered no dramatic evidence. He simply said what he knew to be true, briefly and plainly, and then said that he did not intend to proceed, and that he was sorry, genuinely sorry, for the disruption to everyone who had traveled and prepared and hoped. He stepped back. The silence was total. Nadia stood beside him without moving for a very long time. Her face did not crumble. That was the thing he would remember afterward. She did not crumble. did not fill the silence with denial or tears or the kinds of words the moment seemed designed to extract. She simply stood there with the white orchids behind her and 280 people in front of her, and her stillness was the most honest thing she had done in months. Eventually, her mother rose from her seat, then her father. Someone led Nadia from the front of the hall, and Kamran watched her go without expression, and then he sat down in the front pew next to his own mother, who had not yet said a word, and he felt her take his hand and hold it. He did not see Nadia again that night. He did not see her for a long time after. Months later, in December, he received a message from her. 2 sentences. "I've thought about what you did. I think you wanted to hurt me." He read it twice and then put his phone down and watched the evening light shift across the wall of his apartment. And he thought about how she had said what you did rather than what I did, and how the sentence was entirely characteristic and entirely consistent with everything he now understood about her. He did not reply. Not from anger, not even from principle. He simply had nothing left to say to someone who, even now, was most fluent in the language of their own innocence. He had built enough structures in his life to know that some things, once the foundation is compromised, cannot be salvaged. You clear the site, you begin again. You build slowly and carefully, and only on ground you've tested yourself. Outside, the December light was going thin and pale, the way it does in Lahore when the year is ending, and Kamran Siddiqui sat in the quiet of his own company and found that the quiet, finally, was enough.